Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm doing these on Friday early afternoon because scheduling got crazy this week, but I never like to miss a week, so let's jump in and see what we got. First up, James Clarendon wanted to follow up from last week's conversation about the new Arcooda monitors potentially supporting higher than 72 hertz. And James said that it certainly reports that the input is 120 hertz and shows an image, but James suspects I'm right that it's dropping frames and just filling it to whatever is the max in that scenario, probably 60 or 72 hertz depending. Apparently the mode line was correct, but that's just something that we have to test. Now, the new Arcooda, the 4K one that they're also letting me borrow, is stuck in customs, so I was going to save the live stream to test all of that, because I figured if everything goes pretty quickly and I do all the testing in 2 hours, then great, we do it all in one. And if I start the stream and can't even get to the 4K monitor yet, that's cool. I'll just do 2 of them. But I just didn't want to do another stream following up on this one, and then another, and then another. So yeah, sorry for the delay, but it's just typical customs crap. It's not Arcooda's fault or anything. It's just, it is what it is. But I am really looking forward to taking another look. And I would also like to do the motion blur testing, which I don't have the equipment to do it right. So I'll do a couple of quick runs on a live stream, but it's not something I would really want to publish in a post because, to do the motion testing that I did in the IPS versus OLED video took forever. It took so many tries to get it right. And if you saw the video, you'd notice only a handful of frames was actually steady enough because you're taking your camera and moving it along with the UFOs and stuff like that, or the trees in Sonic or whatever. So yeah, I promise I'll get to all of that stuff. But I think I just want to do it in live stream form and kind of go from there. Unless somebody wants to hook me up with like B&H or a photo company and get me a bunch of free camera equipment. But well, yeah, I don't expect that, obviously. So yeah, I'll let everybody know as soon as it gets here, and I'll try to plan a live stream this time. So that way I'll have some advance notice for people, but who knows? My schedule is all over the place, so that never really works out. A couple of things from Pippin. First, they have a Sega Saturn with a Fenrir pre-modded where it looks like the colors are off. The whole thing is tinted pink in RGB, but fine in composite. Their PAL unmodified Saturn with the same RGB cable doesn't do it. So excellent troubleshooting. So it's definitely not the cable then. So it's got to be the console, and I seriously doubt it has anything to do with the Fenrir. But what I would look for are any shorts or the DIN itself. So the first thing that you could start with is just simply grabbing the AV cable, grabbing the RGB cable while it's plugged in, look at your monitor and carefully, don't, gorilla manhandle it, just carefully like twist it back and forth, a little tiny tug clockwise or counterclockwise, up and down, left and right, wiggle in and out. And if you see the screen change, that's the issue. You would need to replace the DIN connector, and that's very common these days on Saturns. Now, I guess maybe very common isn't fair, but it's not surprising at all if that would be the answer. I guess that's the best way to put it. And if that doesn't do anything at all, then I would open up the console and check for shorts, check for anything under there. Maybe when somebody was installing the Fenrir, they dropped something over 2 pins. Who knows? Maybe just something happened over the years. You never know. But that's when I would really get in there. Get a magnifying glass if you can. If not, grab your cell phone and get a really well-lit shot of everything so then you could zoom in afterwards and look at pictures and check for anything that could either be like a leaking capacitor or maybe even just a dead cap, I guess. But look for signs that are anything wrong. But my gut's kind of telling me that if you wiggle that cable, it's going to start to freak out, and that's going to be your answer. But please let us know, because if this is a weird new thing, I'd love to know about it. Another question. Have I seen people that may have been biased on something when it comes to Wii widescreen and full screen, limited and full range, and anything like that? Yeah, however, most of the time it comes from a good place and it doesn't take everything into account. And I've made that mistake before. In fact, the Wii video I made had a couple of mistakes in it, nothing that would affect your purchase, which is why I didn't delete the video immediately. I would have if there was something that would have, like the best quick side thing, years ago I reviewed a horrible Hyperkin piece of crap console. And one of the problems that I called out turned out to actually be a problem with my TV and had nothing to do with the console. And I think I pinned a comment apologizing, but one of the things that I called out was one of like 30 and had nothing to do with your buying advice. So even though I was dead wrong, I left the video up because my mistake made no bearing on my recommendation to you. So that was the same thing with my Wii video. The end conclusions were all legit. There was just a couple of mistakes in there. But the problems are, especially with limited and full range, what are your target devices? Do they only accept one or the other? Do they only accept one or the other in certain scenarios? So there's lots of times where people are repeating information they heard that is correct in most scenarios, but might not be in one fringe type of setup. Same thing with widescreen and full screen, because all of games have widescreen support. Some have full screen support. The way they generate their video is a little bit weird. And I think I would have to do a whole other video to really explain what's going on with it. And I don't even have a deep understanding. I mean, I probably have more than your average nerd, but not as much as somebody like Extrems, obviously. So yeah, maybe someday I could do it. But just when I see bias like that, I try so hard to be patient, and I'm not. Some days I just throw up the middle fingers in the comments and walk away, but like, I'm only human. But most of the time I try to approach it with patience, because I do know it's confusing and there's a lot of factors involved in that. And a lot of times people are just trying their best. So yeah, it can get annoying though. And lastly, Pippin learned that Samsung TVs, at least their recent models, game mode disables the aspect ratio control, leaving 16:9 as the only option. So that sort of makes sense, because it also explains part of why the LG TVs have latency issues in 4:3. It's not like they're super laggy, but they're certainly more than they were in 16:9. And it must be because they have to buffer the image in order to squish it or stretch it to the proper aspect ratio. And adding the buffer is what adds lag. So if you want it in game mode, there you go. Now, Samsung, especially after doing that IPS versus OLED video, it seems that Samsung is trying really, really hard to get the best 60 hertz performance out of their TVs while sacrificing anything else they can in order to get that good latency. So your example of no aspect control in game mode, that's one of them. The compatibility with off-timing 60 hertz signals that I showed in the OLED versus IPS video, that's another one. So yeah, I don't know. The more I look into Samsungs, the less I'm thinking they're good for retro use. But that doesn't mean they're bad TVs, and it doesn't mean if you have one, you should feel slighted. I still think if people bought that one that I reviewed for all the reasons that I talked about, it's an amazing gaming monitor and desktop monitor too. But I just think as a general statement, if you're thinking, all right, I want to play a lot of retro stuff, even with the 4:3 latency issue, I still would lean towards LG for their compatibility. But that is mostly opinion too. So you're all welcome to think whatever you want about that. And if I miss something, please let me know, because the more info I get, the better. But yeah, hopefully I was able to help with some of this stuff. Tony Shadwick said, I've mentioned before a version of Super Metroid with MSU1 audio that uses the original samples. They've gone looking for it and came up empty. Could I point them in the right direction? Yeah, I'll leave a link to the post I did about it that has a link to the MSU1 audio pack, as well as an interview with Sam Miller, the musician who had done that. And also, Sam had done a bunch of other games, and I'm still a Link to the Past is one of them, and I think Super Mario World. And I haven't tried either, but I'm really looking forward to it. I love the Super Metroid one, and I don't think I'll be able to go back playing the original anymore, just because this is the original, but better. What it could have been, should have been, whatever. But I heard that the Super Mario World one is more preference based, so maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. So I'm really interested to see, and I still have a RGB modded CRT that I need to finish, because I asked Steve to do it wrong on purpose. Long story for a whole other thing. So once I correct that, then I actually want to sit and play through Link to the Past again with this audio pack to see how I feel about it. And I don't know if I'm going to play A Link to the Past also with the Querdimoto enhancements to it, or just this. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But for Super Metroid, this is my go-to forever now, just because I like it that much more. But links are in this description to the post that has all the other links in it. Mr. Morrow wants to know if I use an audio DAC for personal listening at my desk. They've been considering getting an HDMI audio extractor for the RetroTink 4K's output. So that's a great question. Short answer is no, but if I did, I would use the Ship Modi. That is the actual name of it. I'm not being silly. I'll leave a link to that, and I think I may have done a review on it. I can't remember, but I'll leave a link to that one for you. And uh, but I think I want to talk a little bit more about this for perspective and why I chose the ones that I did and everything like that. So I did the audio video a couple of years ago that talked about my NAD receiver. And the very specific reason I chose this one is because it's Atmos compatible, has the HDMI inputs, but it also has an analog bypass mode that doesn't try to filter out analog audio signals. And according to the company, it's the same exact analog circuit that's in their 316B, the 2-channel amp of NADs that I loved. And it's what made me get this one. So all of my analog sources go directly into that. And there are some digital stuff, obviously, like Mister and everything else. And generally speaking, I wish I had some kind of higher end DAC for that just to mess with stuff. Same thing with your scenario of splitting out the RetroTink's HDMI output and then running one of them through a converter into a DAC so you have good analog sound. If you're going analog into the RetroTink 4K, you could just skip it and go into your receiver. You don't need to put audio through the Tink 4K. But obviously, if you're going Mr. Direct Video or HDMI modded consoles, that might be easier. You could also, if you're doing HDMI modded consoles, just grab the analog audio from the consoles as well. And even with the Mister, some of them have pretty darn good audio DACs in them, certainly equal to or better than original console DACs. So I think that's the other reason I haven't rushed out to get one for this setup, because certainly the ones in Ivory's units with the digital DAC in there, I did a whole video on those too. I really like the way those sound. That's total preference. You could hate it if you want to, but I think that they are, from a performance point of view, they're definitely at least equal to the originals. But I'm happy with that scenario for now. But the reason that I got that amp, the reason I'm talking about these other ones is because when a friend of mine had gotten me the 316B 2-channel amp, best for the money stereo amp I've ever heard. You could obviously spend $100,000 on a stereo amp, but for the money, it was under $500. Nothing has ever come close to it. But when I was experimenting with it, I was putting it in different places in my house, trying to figure out how else I could implement it into my setup. And one of the things I wanted to do is see if I could use it for TV watching too. And yes, however, that's when the DAC made a massive, massive difference, because I tried using the one built into my favorite HDMI splitter, which I have always said, use that as like a bonus feature, like oh, by the way, this thing also includes a DAC that you could use if you need to. And from that perspective, it's great. But compared to an actual higher performing audio DAC, no, it's garbage. So going from that one to the Ship Modi, which was, I believe Matt from Insurrection Industries was the one who recommended that. That was like a holy crap difference. And in fact, that setup sounds better with analog than the Marantz receiver that I still really like. They finally fixed the firmware on that one, by the way. I was complaining about that. They broke it and then fixed it. But and that's an awesome 2-channel amp as well. So that combo really sold me on how good that DAC was. And I believe they were around $200 or less. The prices are all over the place because I think they must sell to the customer based on percentage of profit. So when their parts go up, the price goes up, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll leave a link to that as well. So that was a really long way of saying I don't currently use a DAC at my desk, but if I did, I would use the Ship Modi, or if I wanted to use it in this setup, I would use that too. And just very quick again, for any audiophiles listening who are foaming at the mouth, angry that I'm recommending only a $200 DAC, if my receiver was a much higher end one, if I had some crazy Macintosh, audio amp here, I would be trying to get equipment to match it. But that's really the key here. If you have a good setup, then you want good stuff. But if you have holy crap amazing stuff and you put a low end anything into it, it brings the whole quality down. Or vice versa. Like if you got a $5,000 DAC and plugged it into that thing, I don't know how much of a difference I would actually hear from the Ship Modi because that amp isn't that level of quality. So audio, you always have to take it in context, especially when people make blanket statements like I sort of just did about how the Ship Modi is a great DAC. Great in the context. So hopefully that made sense. Apothecary 2 wants to know if there's any work being done towards disabling dithering on the Wii, like has been achieved for other consoles. And I can't remember what can be done specifically with dithering. It's been a while since I watched Wobbling Pixels video that showed all of the awesome things you could do to improve the Wii's image, especially on modern TVs. Because remember, the Wii was out still in the CRT era. The end of it, HD TV era, obviously, because it supports 480p. But I think for the most part, they were really counting on people still using CRTs and still trying to figure out how to make that image look good on all displays. And in hindsight, they did the best they could with the knowledge they had at the time. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that looks significantly better on modern displays if it's disabled. So I would recommend watching Wobbling Pixels video on it. I'll leave a link to the whole post about it and just give it a try and see what you think. Maybe this will solve the problem for you, or maybe you've already watched that video and dithering isn't covered or isn't covered the way that you would need to improve it. If that's the case, please let me know, just because I'm kind of curious to know about that. And similarly, the 2024 and 2025 LG OLED TV models, as well as 2025 Panasonics, make use of diagonal dithering to fight near black prominence overshoot. Do I think it impacts older games notably if you aren't using the screens at monitor distance? Now, that's a great question. And I think that might be something that depends on people's total setup as well as their eyes, or maybe not. I haven't seen it, but I also haven't been looking for it. So that could be one of those things where if you cleaned up the Wii's image following Wobbling Pixels recommendations, then suddenly the dithering would stand out a lot, and maybe even more if you did it, if you had one of those TVs. But for me, I loaded the games with no filtering on them when I was doing the video, just because I wanted to show like basic results. I didn't want to have the Wii look spectacular and have people do it themselves and go, was Bob lying? Like, no. Plug your Wii in. Here's what you get. If I wanted to do a video on Wii enhancements, I would have done a video on that instead. So maybe I was wrong to take that approach to it, but I'm just being honest with where my head was at. So I told you that to tell you that I don't know, because I don't think I've tested it in a scenario where I was getting the cleanest video out of a Wii and looking for that. So thanks for the tips. And if anybody has any thoughts on this, please let me know. Next up, Jason Guffey has a couple of questions, and I'm sorry, Jason, but I think I'm going to be completely useless to you for every single one of these, but I'm going to try my best. First, they're using an Elgato 4K 60 Pro capture card to get footage of consoles with HDR output like PS5 and Switch 2. However, they're noticing that they have some fairly noticeable color banding going on in their capture feed when sending it to your TV, while just connecting the consoles directly to the TV doesn't have any of the issues. So I've only tried to do HDR capture once or twice, and my setup just gets wonky with it. I have heard that Windows has HDR issues. I've heard people have capture issues with it. It could just be that was something that happened years ago and it's all fixed now, and I'm just an idiot for not trying again. But I've just never been able to use HDR successfully through a PC, and it's also not been a focus of anything that I've done. So once again, it could just be a super easy thing that I'm not seeing or haven't tried in a while. But it also sounds like, are you getting okay captures, but not like, is the capture okay, but you're getting color banding on your TV? Because yeah, that could be color space settings, but I don't know. Whenever HDR is in the mix, things can get very weird. So I would just see if there's anybody else doing it with the exact same equipment you have, and see if people are running into the same issue, because that's really the best way to troubleshoot. Speaking of troubleshoot, their PC has been having issues like boot loops, crashes when idle, not waking up after sleep, etc. Do I know of any way to start troubleshooting? So the last time I had issues that I was trying to troubleshoot, there were boot disks with tools on them. Boot disks. Now they're USB sticks, but I still call them boot disks because I'm an old man, and that's what we used to use, was 3.5-inch floppy boot disks with these tools on them. But yeah, there's ways that you can go in and just run a test overnight, and it'll tell you if your RAM failed, if your motherboard might have some issues. But if that doesn't show you anything, or if you can't figure out what's what, it just keeps crashing, I always just start isolating components. So I would take my computer and I would remove every single extra thing that's plugged in, including external devices, USB, because USB can cause problems too, especially if there's shorts in the cables or anything like that. So I would have a bare minimum setup with almost nothing connected to it. Heck, I might even unplug the keyboard and mouse and run one of those tests overnight to see. And if it still happens, then I would take out one of the RAM sticks. I would try a different hard drive. And when you try it, also try everything that's connected with it. So if you have a SATA drive connected with a SATA cable, remove both. If you have an NVMe drive, try a different NVMe slot on the motherboard just as a troubleshooting step and try to isolate it that way. But that's why it's so tricky to do stuff like this. And it's also why I'm hesitant to build my own PCs these days, even though I've done that my entire life since I was literally like, I don't know, 10 years old or something, probably younger. It's because if I buy all of these components and I plug them all in and nothing works, I got to try troubleshooting each individual component. And some stuff I could take a video card out and put it in a different motherboard. I could take a hard drive out, but there's some stuff that might not be compatible, like RAM. If I got brand new RAM and to match with a new motherboard, then I wouldn't be able to test it on an older motherboard, certainly not at full speeds. So that's something that's always, been a pain, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I probably should be upgrading this PC already, but I'm going to try to limp it on for a couple more years because I haven't had any issues with it. But I do, I'm generally nice to my equipment, but I push my PCs really hard. Just editing video every day, running, from the time I wake to the time I fall asleep every night, constantly messing with stuff. So yeah, I don't know. But try isolating stuff and try running one of those boot disks. And lastly, their Samsung S90D OLED just started having compatibility issues with their Denon 660 AVR to the point where ARC and eARC aren't even shown as sound output options anymore. No idea what happened since they have both disconnected from the internet to avoid forced firmware updates that could break their setup. That happened to me. But when they go to select the input on their TV, the AVR is a valid input option and connects again. But the instant they go to sound options and try to select the receiver as an eARC sound output, the AVR disappears from the list completely. Jason also tried swapping cables to other known working cables, but the problem persists. And even the built-in HDMI troubleshooter on the TV insists that every cable is inadequate and only supports 720 by 480 resolution. Okay. So that's your clue right there. Something's probably wrong with your TV. Does it do that? So unplug all of the HDMI ports from your TV, which might be a pain because you probably have a pretty hefty setup, but unplug all of them and then connect one at a time and test. You run your HDMI test on one port and one cable at a time and see maybe your eARC port just happened to go bad. That shouldn't happen, but it does. I've absolutely seen HDMI ports just stop working over the years, even if you've had a cable plugged in. And same thing with the cable. I've had a cable plugged in, working in a setup mounted to a wall that nobody ever touches. And one day nothing's working. You get speckles all over the screen. It turns out it's a bad cable. How the heck that happened, I have no idea, but I've definitely personally seen that and heard of it as well. So yeah, that's where I would start. And also check and see if any other S90D owners are having the same issue. But yeah, that's a pain. Sorry that you're dealing with all that stuff. And sorry I wasn't much of a help this week. Ken Bakes has a question about signal safety, transcoders, and CRTs. They have a setup with a G-comp going to a comp to RGB and OSSC with the void scaler, that firmware, that's turning the OSSC into a downscaler, into the Wakaba Video RGB to composite S-video converter to two ST-CRTs, and RGB SCART to the RetroTink 4K. So here's the question. If they're curious about the safety, if they haven't previously adjusted their settings on a console, for example, Xbox outputting 720p on component, for example, prior to letting the signal travel through their switch transcoder chain, and if they would risk damaging their transcoder or CRT if they're pumping 720p into them before they get a chance to change their settings. So, the answer to this, the official answer to this is always be careful with your CRTs, because while I'm pretty sure the RGB to composite S-video converter is going to be fine, it's not going to work right, obviously. If something were to happen to that, you could just go buy another one. And I don't like to waste people's money, but in the context of life, if you're doing this and you accidentally blow out a transcoder, you could just get another transcoder. Whereas if you blew out your amazing CRT, you might not ever be able to get the same one again, or the same one in the same condition, et cetera, et cetera. So what I would always do is try to find a way to be extra, extra careful on the CRT end. Now, as I say that, many times I have sent the wrong resolution to my CRTs, and none of them have ever died directly as a result. Actually, none of my CRTs that have ever really died on me, but the point is, I've never like sent 1080p by accident and had the CRT explode or stop working or anything like that. But I would absolutely be careful. But to continue Ken's question, they figure they could leave their CRT off to protect it until they adjust their settings. 100% what I would do. What about the transcoder? It doesn't have a power button. Should they leave it unplugged until they ensure they're sending the correct signal? So for my opinion, now this is not fact, my opinion, what I would do in my setup is just leave it plugged in and not worry about it. But if you're worried about it, if you don't want to have to deal with replacing it, if this is a setup you use all the time, it certainly wouldn't hurt to be cautious about it and maybe add one of those inline power switches to it so you could always have one of those connected, or some way to toggle the power for you. Certainly power is all you'd have to worry about. If you send a high resolution signal to a device that's off, it's not going to do anything. So you wouldn't have to worry about that. But just turn the power off if you're worried. I wouldn't, though. And once again, it's probably not the best advice to give. I'm just being honest, because I just don't think that would be a realistic thing to happen. I would be very surprised if I blew out a transcoder for that. And once again, if I blew it out, I could just pick up another one. It's not like blowing out a PDM. Ken says, P.S. I watch these videos in the morning as they're getting the kids ready for school with their wife, and she constantly notes, Bob just seems like a chill dude you could trust to know his stuff. I try to always be annoyingly honest, which is why I over-explain, because I have no problem being wrong. But if I know something for sure, I also want to tell that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm always trying my best. Thank you. That being said, we appreciate your new inclusions on non-retro RGB recommendations. The coffee cleaner suggestion was timely this week. We all have lives outside of retro gaming. So yeah, thank you very much for the compliments. And I'm really digging the other reviews because it's nice to just have such a low pressure thing to do. Because like, if I get a major recommendation for retro gaming wrong, that's like a big deal. Did I do my work? Are all of my other videos wrong? Like, I take that really, really, really seriously. But if I suggest a $12 coffee cleaner and you could have gotten an $11 one that does the same thing, is anybody really going to be mad at me? Like, for real? Like, I'm okay having mistakes that aren't that big of a deal, that are not related to retro gaming. So yeah, but I do take all that stuff real seriously, by the way. I'm just saying it's nice to have a low pressure thing that I could just have some fun with and whatever. So yeah, I'm going to be doing some silly ones. Hopefully by the next roundup, I'll have at least one other silly one. I don't know if I'll be able to make it funny, but sometimes the ridiculousness of me doing a video on something so unrelated to any of the other stuff I do, that in itself kind of cracks me up, but I don't know. So thank you for all the very nice things that you said, and I'm going to keep trying my absolute best, and I really, really like doing these extra ones, also because they barely take up any time. So it's not like you're not going to get a RetroRGB thing because I did one of these other things. It adds so little to the overall scope of things for me. So yeah, thank you very much, and hopefully I can keep doing all of them. James Clarendon said, just a note on the Viewpoint 64 post on RetroRGB, that copy that's labeled master isn't necessarily the master version that would be used for duplication, but rather a master candidate that would be submitted to Nintendo for approval. It's very possible the game was submitted multiple times and sent back for revisions. This is one of the most nail-biting parts of development because you don't want to touch a thing, and there's always going to be there's always a chance to find new compliance issues or bugs. Humorously, the scandal-plagued Amico can't get an update to their expensive cornhole title because Nintendo keeps finding new must-fix issues from their original submission unrelated to the update, prolonging the scandal. Oh, you mean that thing that I warned everybody about, that everybody talked crap and got angry, and then it turned out to be spot on with everything I said? People get so mad sometimes and on the things that are Seemingly so obvious, but anyway, I really appreciate the heads up. I already updated the post based on your suggestion, and to be honest, I was just trying to get that post out early in the morning to share the word about it because it seemed awesome, and I probably should have thought about that a little bit more. So, thank you very much for the suggestion. Change to the post has already been made, and if you're a Nintendo 64 fan and you want to try a new shooter game, it looks awesome. I don't know. I think it's got a bunch of bugs, but as far as like hey, here's a new game that was almost released but wasn't, it's, top of the chain because there's a lot of unreleased games that are mostly just broken. And I think this one's pretty playable, it seems. So yeah, I'll leave a link to the post. And once again, thanks, James. I appreciate it. Mike said they're tired of their retro setup feeling like a science lab and they want to move to having a simple auto switching system for all of their consoles that introduces the least amount of lag possible. Their ultimate goal is being able to walk into the room, turn on a console, and whichever screen they want to play on will have the powered on console showing. They'd like to be able to play on their LG OLED, on their consumer CRT, with component video inputs, and they have no need to capture the video output of the setup. They'll only ever have one console on and won't be trying to have different input sources on each display. All right. Awesome info. Thank you. That is exactly what I would need to answer this. But I'm going to continue first with the rest of your questions so I can try to get it right. They have a mix of input types for the consoles: RGB, HDMI via GameCube and the Carby, Wii for HDMI as well, stuff like that. So they want to try to make it work as seamlessly as they can, and they might need to mod the N64 and NES for RGB output, which is fine if required. They feel like the best option might be a scalable video switch for analog consoles and an HDMI switch for the modern consoles, and those with HDMI adapters like the GameCube. The easy part is the SVS and HDMI switch are going into the TINC 4K and outputting that to the OLED. Where they're getting stuck is the way they should wire things up to also display on the CRT, because they don't want whatever processing they're applying to the OLED to show up on the CRT. Otherwise, the easy answer would be just splitting it. So they figure they'll need an extra output from each of the switch. The HDMI side will receive a component converter and downscaling it to 15 kilohertz, and the SVS side will be able to go through an RGB to comp and into the CRT directly with another switch there so it could auto switch between the converted HDMI source and the SVS output depending on which is active. They just wanted to run this past myself and everybody else listening and see if there might be a better way to accomplish what they're trying to achieve. So first and foremost, I think you're spot on, but I'd like to just try to offer some other perspective. Even if you're like, that's dumb, that's fine. At least you could apply that to your setup and kind of see which is, maybe it just even reinforces what you've already thought about. But the mix of input types are the thing that I would consider. So if you have RGB and HDMI as well as composite and S-video for like the N64, that opens up a couple of different options. On the TINC 4K side, all you would need is the D-sub output on it, and you could just plug it right to the D-sub input and toggle it right from the RetroTINC, and that's it. But for the outputting to your CRT, I think you could just get S-video, composite, and component outputs or RGB output or whatever from the SVS. And I believe the SVS is even looking at, Arthremis is even looking into transcoders built right into it. So that's something you might want to consider, because if you are happy with the composite off of your NES, which, that's preference based, or if you're happy with the S-video from your N64, which most people totally are, then all you would need to do is feed that into your CRT, which I'm pretty sure would have S-video and composite inputs as well if it's got a component. So that's certainly something to consider. That way you don't have to worry about any of this on either side for those. For the HDMI stuff, yeah, you're going to need a transcoder, but here's where you might want to really think about multiple options. So on the Wii U, you could have analog and HDMI out, but I think you would have to toggle that in the menu. But with the Wii U, you could just use the Wii U gamepad. So you might be able to just have both connected. And when you're going to your CRT, switch to component video and 480i. And when you're going to the TINC, switch to HDMI and whatever resolution you're looking for. And same thing, I guess, with the Mister. You could be switching back and forth with that. Or if you have an I/O board, you could have the analog output of the Mister going to the SVS and the HDMI going to the Tink 4K. That would totally work as well. And that might be a great way to integrate that without messing with different settings. And if you have the Mister, leaving the NES as composite might be totally fine, because if you really needed ultra sharp NES, you could use it from the Mister. So those are all things to consider, but the only problem would be, GameCube. You would have to then get S video out of that for the analog side, which I think would be fine. And with the Wii, that would be another one where you would either have to get an internal HDMI mod so you could run both digital and analog at the same time, or you would have to use some kind of downscaler digital to analog converter as well, depending on the resolution you're using. So what you have is complicated, but not outrageous. And your existing idea is doable, but maybe me just throwing these extra ideas in might actually simplify it. And if anybody is listening with a basic setup, they're going, how the heck could that simplify it? That made it so much worse. But anybody with crazy setups like this are probably going, oh yeah, I could save a little bit doing that. So let me know if I pointed you in the right direction or if you have any other questions, but it sounds like an awesome setup, and I think you're already on the right track. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks to everybody who participates in these, and just a reminder that anybody who supports on any service is welcome to post a question. Just please do so wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way these things work, it's kind of tricky to figure out what's a new question on an older post. Plus, like you saw here today, I just like scrolling through and answering in real time as if we were hanging out at an expo together. But any of the services are eligible. It's just common that you only see Patreon because that's where the majority of people support. But it's all equal. It's just, whatever's best for you. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.